Okay, for the first few weeks of 2023, people on preaching duties were given permission to choose our own sermon themes. Of course, the risk of allowing someone to preach on anything they like is that they'll end up preaching on anything they like, but hopefully we'll go well tonight. We'll see how we go. One of my personal frustrations over the years has been the issue of how to be real in worship. And I think often we're not very good at that. So tonight I'm going to do, hopefully a little bit creatively, I want to help us to reflect on that subject. And we have up there a picture, which is a picture of a worship event. And that picture I found very easily, because all I did was I typed into Google Images the word worship, and lo and behold, that was the first picture that came up. And I could have chosen the second picture and it would have looked much like that. I could have chosen any of the first 50 pictures and they would have looked much like that. When you search worship on Google, that's the kind of picture you get. And here's a question to think about. If you put a Bible verse to match that picture, what Bible verse would you pick? I want to show you what my choice is. If we can bring up the next slide, that would be good. My God, why have you forsaken me? And I'm guessing from the response that your instinct is the picture and the words don't quite go together, do they? But all I've done is chosen a verse out of the Psalms. And if I said to you, doesn't that sentence just lift your spirit sky high? Don't you just feel like you want to get up and dance in the aisles? You'd be looking at me and thinking I've gone slightly mad. Okay. If I wanted a better picture for these words, it would look like this. But the problem is that you don't find pictures like that when you search worship in Google. To get a picture like that, I had to search for words like depression and pain and drowning. No one in their right minds, when they're loading this up into Google, would load the picture up and put worship as a tag for that picture. We're just not wired to think that way. Our wiring is that for some reason, worship experiences can only be positive. And I want to challenge you about that whole mindset this evening. Here's a song you might know. It comes from Lamentations chapter 3, and it goes like this. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning, new every morning. Great is your faithfulness, O God. Great is your faithfulness. And probably 3/4 of you knew that the moment I started singing. You wouldn't even have needed the words there to join in. That's a song which people of my era have probably sung 1,000 times in church services. It comes from a book called Lamentations. And if you read Lamentations, you get about 120 verses, 2 of which are positive, those 2, and the other 118 are negative. I want to back up about 6 verses and read the previous verses from chapter 3, and it comes up here. He pierced my heart with arrows from his quiver, he being God. I became the laughing stock of all my people. They mocked me in song all day long. He has filled me with bitter herbs and given me gall to drink. He has broken my teeth with gravel. There's a powerful image. He has trampled me in the dust. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. So I say, my splendor is gone, and all that I had hoped from the Lord. And please put your hands up if you recall singing that as a worship song in church. Do you see the contrast? And if you start to think about it, do you see how ridiculous it is? So let's go on to the next slide again and come back to this verse here. It's from Psalm 22. It's the opening verse of Psalm 22. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a song, which I wrote a few years ago, inspired by Psalm 22. And I want to try to give you a different picture of what's possible in worship if we take seriously the whole issue of allowing the wide range of our life experience to be brought before God. So hopefully things will go well. We'll see how that goes. Oh my God. Why are you so far away? Why so far away? Through the day, like rolling started, you start reply. Without letting tears flow, only you can show. Oh my God, why are you so far away? Why so far away? Trouble rises in the days of the slowly. Oh, why? Why are you so far away? Why so far away? People know that I can fight their words slash with fire. Even loved ones me in time family. Why are you so far away? Why so far away? Cold seasons pass, then the days are old. I know some sweet sun, I never saw this. So, when was the last time you heard a song that was that honest about the negative aspects of our life with God? We just don't do it, do we? Psalm 22, verse 1 has a great picture of what worship in painful situations is all about. And it gives us the freedom to do things that I wish we would do much more of in church worship. The first thing it does is it gives us permission to ask hard questions of God. Why have you forsaken me? And that's only one psalm out of 20 or 30 that I could have chosen. Here are some others. Why, Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? That's Psalm 10. Psalm 13 says, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? Psalm 42, I say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me? Why must I go about mourning, oppressed by the enemy? Psalm 44, awake, Lord, why do you sleep? Rouse yourself. Why do you hide your face and forget our misery and oppression? Psalm 62, how long will you assault me? Would all of you throw me down, this leaning wall, this tottering fence? Psalm 82, here's a great one. How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Here's my question to the church, to us as a church. Where are the worship songs that give us the freedom to ask the hard questions of God? That's worth thinking about, isn't it? When do we get to ask in our church meetings the why questions of God? Why did you allow my house to flood last week? It's a real question. And we need in worship to be able to express those questions on our mind. But it also says this verse that we can share our feelings with God. This is a question in its form, but surely we can see that it's full to the brim with powerful emotion. He's asking the question, but the reason for the question is he's feeling completely alone. He's feeling abandoned by God. And that's a feeling that he wants to allow himself, find the space to express in his worship. Of course, not all emotions are negative, and the Psalms have some magnificent pictures of positive emotions. I delight in God's law. In peace, I will lie down and sleep. I will give thanks to the Lord. I will be glad and rejoice in you. You fill me with joy and eternal pleasures at your right hand. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. We should be expressing all the good things about our life together with God. But there are also some hard words as well about the way in which we feel. Here are some from further on in Psalm 22. I am in distress. I am faint. My bones are in agony. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. I am a worm and not a person. My heart is turned to wax. It is melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a clay pot, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death. And it's so important for us to understand that I'm not reading something that is way out there on the fringe. This is slap bang in the heart of Israel's worship manual. You understand? The Psalms, we think of it, if we're not careful, we think of it the wrong way. We think of it because of our adoration of the Bible, if you like. We think of it as special in some regard, and it is, but it's also very real. At the time these songs were collected, they were the songs that Israel used day by day, week by week, year by year in the temple to express their worship relationship with God. And I've just read one of those songs that they would sing or read or include out loud in ways to make sure that people have the language that they need to be honest with God in the hard times as well as the negative times. And the big lesson from all of this is it's safe and it's okay to be honest with God. If you're feeling lonely or depressed or angry or confused or bitter or guilty, all of those feelings are real, honest feelings. And we don't have to hide them from God. We don't have to hide them from one another. I love to think of God as a God with big shoulders. He can take the worst that we fire at him. It's okay. And the third thing I want to say about this verse is that there's a difference between intimacy with God and whether or not we have a pain-free life. Okay, do you understand what I'm saying there? I put it up in two forms, a kind of a positive and negative. So intimacy with God does not guarantee a pain-free life. So what that means is you're not allowed to say to God, God, if you really love me, you wouldn't let this bad thing happen to me. Okay? Those two things are not connected. And this other thing as well, which we can go wrong both ways. We're not allowed to say to ourselves, something bad has happened in my life, therefore there must be something wrong with my relationship with God. That doesn't follow either. I remember watching just 2 or 3 weeks ago a dramatized documentary of the Bali bombings on TV. And one of the subplots of that was an Indonesian woman whose husband was killed in the bombings. And she, out of her Buddhist or Muslim mindset, was in front of her shrine that she worshipped at, and she was asking the questions of God. And it was along the lines of, what have we done to make God angry? She assumed that bad thing wouldn't have happened unless we had done something bad and God somehow was punishing us. And the Christian principle, the Christian worldview is that God loves us, irrespective of whether we're in a good place or a bad place. I think it's really important to do that. If you go back for a moment to the song, The Steadfast Love of the Lord Never Ceases, I think the tragedy of that song is that we've disconnected it from its context. It's a great song, but if my life is guaranteed to be good no matter what I do, I don't need to rely on God's goodness. It's precisely because we go through the tough times that we need to hold on to the reality that God, even if we can't see it in that moment, is still good. Okay, and we have the picture, the ultimate picture of that, and of course, is that this verse that we've just been thinking about. Why have you forsaken me? The famous use of that is by Jesus himself. And if ever there was a picture of a man for whom a life of suffering and a life of service get woven together in the same body, it has to be Jesus, doesn't it? And Jesus on the cross says, his first words out of his mouth, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I think to myself, if it's okay for Jesus to ask the hard questions, surely it's okay for us. If it's okay for Jesus to express his deepest feelings, both good and bad in life, then it's okay for us. What were his final words? Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit. Challenging God, questioning God, laying bare his raw heart and emotions, but at the last, still trusting in the goodness of God. And that's what we're called to do. It's what we're encouraged to do It's what God is saying to us. I'm waiting for you to be honest about all your life. Don't feel you have to hide anything from me. Feel free to tell it just as it is, and I will love you still. World without end. I want to sing another song now with your forbearance. We'll see how we go another sing. This is another one of those songs where you will recognise the psalm immediately. I start singing if I was to sing, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul belongs after you. And you'll know the song that's inspired by that. What frustrates me here is that there's a second verse on that song which reads this: you're my friend and you are my brother, even though you are a king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. One part of me says, those are nice words. And another part of me wants to scream in frustration and say to you, did the person who wrote those words actually read Psalm 42? Because what you're about to hear is my interpretation of it, and we're going to combine these parts. Okay? The challenge is to allow ourselves the positives and the negatives. I'm trying. Speak, speak, oh God. To treat you, oh God. I know the best is right to your house. Say your desire. Now I'm taking the night. It's a big heart. Why so sad? Why so sad? Oh, it's so good. Oh God. Oh God. Yeah, black and blue, just as light. So powerful that you era pressed by the list for oh, said, oh, Thy seasons blink to flow, oh God. Be my God. Lead me on. So, let's look at our discussion question. Hopefully that's given you something to talk about. Here's my question to you. What parts of our church life currently help us to be honest with God in our worship? One thing I don't want to do is to imply by a sermon like this that we score zero on the question. I actually think out of the churches that I've been in, this is probably one of the local congregations that does better than most at this whole area. But we can always do better. And we can encourage ourselves with the good things we do. And if you can think of things that we can do better, talk about that in your tables together.